we are winners of Bimal Krishna Matilal Logic Prize 2021. To introduce, Professor Ranjani has an experience of over 30 years in teaching and research. She has a master's from Illinois Institute of Technology, USA, and PhD from IIT Madras. She is an active researcher in computer architecture, networks, artificial intelligence, language technology, and Indian logic. Regarding my background, I have an experience of over 15 years in teaching and research. I hold a master's from Western Michigan University and a PhD from Anna University, India. My interests lie in Indian philosophy, computational logic, with a bent towards AI. Talking about logic in India, it can be seen prevalent from the ancient times. Work can be seen specifically in Nyaya and Mimamsa. We could see that many have contributed towards Eastern and Western logic. One among them is Bimal Krishna Matilal, after whom this prize is named. He was an exponent of both types of logic and was briefly a professor in Oxford. Regarding the logic initiatives in our country, there are some forums like Calcutta Logic Circle. Weekly seminars and annual workshops are being organized to encourage and disseminate the knowledge of logic in this circle. Another forum is the Association for Logic in India, who conduct symposium and conferences. Apart from these, courses are being offered from some universities on logic. Of late, several MOOC courses such as knowledge representation and reasoning are conducted, which include a lot of stuff on logic. Other than these, logic is also being taught as a part of mathematics and computer science courses. All said, still a lot could be done towards the spread and study of logic. From our end, we are trying to bring out the rich logical concepts which are hidden in the Indian philosophies such as Mimamsa and provide a framework for researchers that could be used in multiple domains. In this direction, we have authored a paper titled A Formalism to Specify Unambiguous Instructions inspired by Mimamsa in Computational Settings, for which the prize was awarded. We thank convener, reviewers and members of Calcutta Logic Circle for providing feedback and comments. Next, Professor Ranjani Parthasarathi will provide an introduction of our work.
Greetings to all. The title of the paper that we are presenting today is the following: A Formalism to Specify Unambiguous Instructions inspired by Mimamsa in Computational Settings. At the outset, we would like to thank our teacher, erudite scholar Vidwan Late Shri D. Gopaladeshikan Swami, who is a Mimamsa Shiromani, who taught us all the basics of Mimamsa and the associated philosophies. So the outline of our presentation would be the following. We would start with the motivation for the work, followed by an introduction to the Indian philosophy of Mimamsa, and then we will go into the details of the logical formalism based on Mimamsa and the applications of this formalism in computer science. The motivation for this work is derived from three aspects. First is the philosophy of Mimamsa. From the knowledge of Mimamsa and its relation to interpretation of actions, we have taken certain tenets of this philosophy and tried to formalize it. Second, of course, is as computer scientists, there are a lot of applications in computer science for which interpretation of actions becomes very important. So we identify those areas of computer science where the tenets of this philosophy can be applied. And thirdly, we formally state this philosophy so that it can be applied in a very generic sense. So in a sense, this is a formalism which is at the intersection of the philosophy of Mimamsa, mathematical techniques and computer science. So that is what gives rise to MIRA, which is Mimamsa inspired representation of actions. We will now start with some of the details of this philosophy of Mimamsa. let us look at an overview of Hindu scriptures to understand the place of Mīmāṁsā in it. We have a shloka in Sanskrit which says, Angani Vedas Chatvaraha Mīmāṁsā Nyayavistaraha Puranam Dharmashastram Cha Vidyahyeta Chaturdasha. So this shloka explains that there are 14 different fields of knowledge that one needs to study or acquire. Out of these 14 fields of knowledge, we have the 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajur Veda and Atharva Veda. We have 6 Veda Angas or subsidiaries of the Vedas, Shiksha, Kalpa, Vyakarana, Nirukta, Jyotisha and Chandas. So then we have Mimamsa, which is the science of interpretation. Then we have Nyaya Vistara, which is about logic. Then we have Puranam, which can be looked at the literature related to folklore and mythology. Then we have Dharma Shastram, which can be looked at as the science of righteousness, law and conduct. So thus we have 14 different fields of knowledge. And we can see that Mimamsa holds a very central part in this 14 fields of knowledge. Now Mimamsa, we said, is a science of interpretation. So what exactly does it interpret? So it interprets the Vedas. Now Vedas constitute a body of knowledge which is revealed and passed on through oral traditions and is considered to be apaurusheya, which means it is not human made. It is not created by a human. So it is something which is passed on from generation to generation through the oral tradition. So there is no speaker as such whose intentions can be directly perceived. So we need to perceive the intentions from the body of knowledge as such, which is where the need for a proper interpretation comes in. So to say Jaimini, who initiated this interpretation science or so-called Mimamsa, to help us to understand how the Vedic injunctions are to be interpreted so that the rituals that need to be performed are performed in the right manner. Now the performance of the rituals itself is said to be something which is done in order to do right action or dharma. So how does one perform dharma? Through these rituals, and how exactly these things are to be done. So that is the basic idea behind Mimamsa. So Mimamsa in general can be looked at as thinking or investigating or interpreting something. So it interprets what is said in the Vedas. Now when we talk of Mimamsa, we actually have 2 parts which are called Karma Mimamsa or Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. Karma Mimamsa deals with the interpretation of the Karma Kanda, that is the ritualistic aspect of the Vedas. So this is arranged into 12 chapters which deals with various rituals and actions and various methods of interpretation and so on. Okay. So we will now take a look at some of the tenets of this. Now, one of the important aspects of Mimamsa is what is called as the concept of bhavana. Bhavana can be looked at as bringing into being, making something actually happen, right? So something like that. So now this bhavana is addressed in Mimamsa at 2 levels. You can loosely look at bhavana as motivation. So you can look at bhavana as something which motivates at the psychological level and at the actual activity level. So we talk about 2 types of bhavana in Mimamsa. One is called Shabdi bhavana, the other is called Arti bhavana. So Shabdi bhavana is one that deals with motivation at the psychological level, and Arti bhavana deals with motivation at the actual activity level. Now to understand this bringing into being or this motivation, it talks about 3 things. That is, what is to be brought into being, how it is to be done, and through what means. So you can look at it loosely as objective, instrument and auxiliaries. Now the goal of Shabdi bhavana is to basically to generate that Arti bhavana, that is to induce one to actually perform that action. So the objective of Shabdi bhavana is Arti bhavana, generating Arti bhavana. The instrument, how that is actually done, is through the verbal termination which is there in the sentences. And how does it actually happen? How does it motivate the person to do that? By means of eulogy or criticism. So there are sentences which motivate a person to do something or not do something based on either praising something or criticizing something. So these three aspects of Shabdi Bhavana give rise to Arti Bhavana. Now Arti Bhavana is the actual activity level motivation. So there the objective is whatever is the objective of the sacrifice that needs to be performed, and the instrument, the how, deals with the actual performance, and the auxiliaries deal with the procedure that involves instruction interpretation. So you can see why the interpretation of instructions becomes important. So now we'll take a look at some of these interpretation tenets which are there in Mīmāṁsā. Now to understand how interpretation is done, Mīmāṁsā takes different views of how things can be interpreted. So it talks about different types of injunctions and how they are to be understood. There are different classifications of injunctions also that are there in Mīmāṁsā, and it also talks about how an injunctive and a non-injunctive statement has to be connected and together how they are to be interpreted. It also talks about sequencing of different actions that need to be done. When you have a sequence of actions that need to be performed for a complete sacrifice, the actual sequence, what exactly should the actual sequence be? So there also there are certain rules of interpretation that Mīmāṁsā talks about. It also talks about mandatory and optional performance of actions. So we'll take a very quick look at some of these things, because the aspects from these are the ones that are used in our formalism. Talking about the types of injunctions, right? So we talk about vidhi and nishedha. So an injunctive statement, vidhi, is something which directs a person to perform an action. For example, tell the truth. Okay, it is a injunction which is directing a person to perform an action. So we have nishedha, which are called as prohibitory statements. So these prohibit a person from performing a certain action. For example, do not harm others. So we have two types of statements: injunctive, vidhi, and prohibitory, nishedha. Then we also have eulogy or criticism, which are arthavada. So these statements support the injunctions. Either it could be a vidhi that it is supporting, or it could be a nishedha that it is supporting. So if it is praising something, it would be praising a vidhi. It would be criticizing the action which is a nishedha action or a prohibitory statement. So for example, there is a statement which says Vayur Vaik Shepishta Devata, which means Vayu, being a god of speed, will help you achieve the results faster. So it motivates you or kindles you into performing an action or a ritual which is to please Vayu. So something like this. So we can talk about, so we have three types: vidhi, nishedha, and arthavada. This is one way of looking at the statements that are there in the Vedas. Now to understand this arthavada, that is this connection between the injunctive and the non-injunctive statement, we said that the arthavada statements support the injunctive statements. So let's look at how these things can be connected. There are different ways in which they can be connected. Typically it's connected by using either conditions or reason. For example, let's say we have a statement like this: if it is raining, take an umbrella. Now the two parts, if it is raining and take an umbrella, have different verbal forms. So take an umbrella is the injunction. So if it is raining expresses the ground or reason, or what is called as a hetu for the injunction. So we talk about hetu and hetu mad bhava as the connection between the injunctive and the non-injunctive statement. So one is a hetu, which is the reason, and the other one is the one which takes the reason, and based on the reason does something. Now looking at the various classifications of vidhi, okay, there are different types of classifications. So we'll first take a look at the classification 1, which is on the right side. So here we talk about principal injunctions or utpatti vidhi. We have injunctions with auxiliaries, which are called as viniyoga vidhi. Then we have injunction of qualification, which says who is authorized to perform a certain action, so which are called as adhikara vidhi. Then we also have procedural injunctions, which are called as prayoga vidhi. Now in this procedural injunctions, we talk about this order of doing things. We talked about, they are referred to as krama. So we have shruti krama, artha krama, patha krama, sthana krama, mukhya krama and pravritti krama. So shruti krama basically talks about direct assertion, and artha krama talks about giving preference to the meaning rather than to the order in which it is actually stated. So like that we have different ways of interpreting things. Another classification talks about two types of statements. One is a restrictive injunction, another is an exclusive injunction. So restrictive injunctions are niyama vidhi, exclusive injunctions are parisankhya vidhi. We also have a third type of classification which talks about injunctions with auxiliaries and injunctions which set forth result. So it's called as guna vidhi and phala vidhi. So there are different types of classifications, and depending on the type of classification, the method of interpretation would vary. Now let's look at the restrictive and exclusive injunction, because this is something that we will use in our formalism. Now restrictive injunction, which is niyama vidhi, basically talks about mandating something. Okay? So when you have, for instance, when there are two or more methods which are possible to reach a goal, making one of them mandatory, okay, that is called as a restrictive injunction. For example, we have a statement in the Veda which says, pound the corn to remove the husk. Now the husk can be removed in any way, right? You could just use your fingers to remove the husk, but this statement says that you have to pound the corn in order to remove the husk. So it mandates that the action of pounding to remove the husk. So this is called as a niyama vidhi or a restrictive injunction. Similarly, exclusive injunction or parisankhya vidhi, what this helps us to identify is how do you exclude something when more than one item is presented to you. Okay. So for instance, when two alternatives become simultaneously available, this rule will exclude one of them. Okay, so that is this injunction of exclusion or the parisankhya vidhi. Again, an example will explain it better. So for instance, we have a statement which says only 5 animals with 5 toes may be eaten. So what this actually implies is that 5-toed animals other than the stipulated 5 must not be eaten. So it excludes something, right, from what is to be done. So that's why it's called as a exclusive injunction. Next, let us look at the mandatory rules. Now we have this concept of samuchaya or an obligatory rule. So what this rule tells us is that when several accessories are detailed to perform a particular action or to perform, to attain a certain goal, so which, for instance, there could be many sub goals which are actually leading to a final goal. So Mimamsa mandates that you need to perform all of them. So for instance, suppose we have something like take pencil to draw and take pen to write to get good grade in the examination. Now the goal is to get good grade in the examination, but we need pencil to draw and you need to take pen to write. Both need to be done. Both these things need to be done in order to get good grade in the examination. Now we also have the vikalpa or the optional rule. So which says that if several optional instructions are laid out to achieve the same purpose, then Mīmāṁsā suggests that you choose one among those instructions. For example, you say go by cycle or go by bus to reach the destination. Either go by bus or you go by cycle to reach the destination. So you have an option over there. So it's called as a vikalpa. Now based on these different tenets that we have looked at of Mīmāṁsā, now we look at what exactly will be the basis for the formalism that we will use. So we've looked at many ways in which the statements can be interpreted. So this interpretation is what is going to be formalized now. So the main basis for this formalism basically is the arti bhavana, where the objective is the objective of the sacrifice, the instrument is about how actually you need to perform it, and auxiliaries will be through the procedure that involves instruction interpretation. So the motivation, that is the intention to achieve the goal, right, that is identified as the prime requirement for instruction execution. Now this is a very important aspect as far as our formalism is concerned. So the intention to achieve the goal is a must. Once the intention is there to achieve the goal, then the auxiliaries help us to interpret the various statements, and that is done according to the principles of Mimamsa. And when the instruction actually is executed, so we look at how, whether the instruction has been satisfied or not. So we call it as satisfaction S and violation V. And if there is no intention to reach the goal, then that is denoted as a N. So we have a 3-value formula to identify how instructions are executed. So we will now look at the details of the formalism.
Here we will look at the logical formalism that consists of syntax, semantics. Following that, we will do soundness and completeness with applications in computer science. First we will start with the syntax. Actually it consists of the language of imperatives that has I, R, P and B, where I consists of IV union IN. IV is a set of positive unconditional imperatives that is given by I1 plus I2 plus, and IN is a set of negative unconditional imperatives that is given by I dash. R, it denotes reasons, R1, R2, this is also referred as tau. P denotes purpose, which is in terms of sub-goals, P1, P2, this is referred as theta. Both R and P take only proposition formulas. B is a set of binary connectives that consist of conjunction, exclusive disjunction, implication in the form of 3 types, R, I and P. Having done the language of imperatives, now we will formulate certain rules based on the language, and we call that as FI. The first rule is if I belongs to IV, then I dash belongs to IN, and this rule is the reverse of the first rule. Then if I belongs to a set of capital I, then I is a formula. If I is a formula that belongs to a set of capital I and P1 belongs to a set of capital P, then I implied by P, P1 is a formula. If there are two formulas of that kind, I1 implied by P1 and J implied by P, P2, then a conjunction could be formed. In this case, I is not equal to J and P1 is not equal to P2. In the case of exclusive disjunction, I and J are not equal, but theta is same in both cases. If there are two imperatives with phi and psi, then phi implied by I, psi can be is a formula in itself. In this case, phi is not equal to psi. And if tau belongs to R and phi is a formula of imperative, then we can write tau implied by R, phi, this is a formula in itself. Combining all the formulas, we can write the whole thing as in this format. With the formation rules, we also define certain deduction rules. First one is similar to that of conjunction introduction, where we have on the left side one imperative and on the right side the other imperative. The top two formulas deduces the bottom formula through conjunction introduction rule. And conjunction elimination is just the reverse of it. Given the conjunction, we can split into the first part and the second part. The third rule is DENV. And this supports exclusive disjunction. This is towards the left is one formula, and suppose I plus implied by P theta, this again is given, then we deduce the same thing. And this is especially useful when there are a list of instructions that is specified in this format, that is a left format, and in some other passage this instruction is specified. In that case, the instruction that is specified last is being deduced. in the fourth case, DEPV, the top portion of the formulas in DENV remains the same, but the deduction is going to be J dash implied by P theta. And the rules DENV and DEPV is inspired from Niyama Vidhi and Parisankhya Vidhi of Mimamsa. Another two rules are conditional introduction and conditional elimination rules. Suppose we have tau that is can be assumed, and if it leads towards phi, then tau implied by R phi can be deduced. Similarly, the other two rules, if a phi implied by I psi and phi implied by P theta can be deduced. By abstracting, we can write, if we assume X that leads towards Y, then X implied by W Y can be deduced. In the conditional elimination rule, which is modus ponens, if a formula has tau and another formula with tau implied by R phi is given, then a phi can be deduced. The other two formulas are very similar. By abstracting, if X and another formula with X implied by W with Y, then we can deduce Y. With this syntax, we define the semantics. Here, instructions are evaluated to satisfaction, violation, and no intention to reach the goal. In this case, the imperatives phi maps to one of the values in S, V, or N, and tau and theta are proposition formulas that take the value of true or false. So with those, we evaluate I plus and I dash. Suppose if I plus belongs to capital IV and I dash belongs to the negation of negative imperatives, then we can write evaluation of I plus is equal to S, then evaluation of I dash is equal to V. On the other hand, if evaluation of I dash is V, then evaluation of I plus is S. Here, the positive and negative imperatives are treated actually separately, and it is not negated one within the other. For example, doing A is not doing A. So this can be imagined as two separate containers that has positive and negative imperatives that are separate without any connection. And this is inspired from Vidhi and Nisheda from Mimamsa. This formula is imperative enjoining goal. The goal is, it is going to, so checking whether the intention is available or not. Here is an example. Whether the intention is healthy. If the intention is healthy, this is actually the theta value that is to be taken. If theta is true and the imperative phi, if it is satisfied, walk every day for 45 minutes is satisfied, then the formula phi implied by P theta, this stands satisfied, yes. So with yes and the intention to be true T, then the formula evaluates to S. In all the tables that follow, we have included the colors for S as green, V as orange, and N as red. The next formula, the imperative that has the sequence of actions. There are two imperatives that are in a sequence, for example phi and psi. So if phi at time step 1 and psi at time steps 2 both has a satisfaction value, then the formula evaluates to S. An example here is phi is take the paper at time step 1 is satisfied, then write at time step 2 is satisfied, then this imperative evaluates to S. And the assumption here is at time step 1, one of the values is taken, whether it is S, V or V. If one of the imperatives take V, the evaluation is V, and if one of the imperative has the value of N, then the formula takes the value of N. In this type of formula where the imperative enjoins reason, the reason is attached to the goal. Reason here, it indicates some kind of a precondition that precondition can be mapped to true or false value. Say an example is given here, the pen is available, it can be mapped to true or false. If the pen is available and take the pen, if it is satisfied, then so say the whole formula stands satisfied. This is a conjunction of imperatives. Here an imperative is given I1 implied by P1. If that's satisfied and another imperative stands satisfied, then the conjunction stands satisfied. Here P1 is not equal to P2. Here we can take an example. Take a pencil to draw, just this imperative, and take a pen to write, just this imperative. When we do both, then the conjunction stands satisfied, which is S. The disjunction of imperatives. Here we could see there is a common goal P. Now if one of the imperatives satisfied, then the disjunction gets satisfied. Otherwise it is not satisfied. It could be one of the two values V or N. An example here is there are two paths to reach the same goal. One of the path can be taken. So if one path is taken, then it stands satisfied, either this row or this row. Now having done the syntax now and semantics, now we can move to the soundness. Soundness and completeness. Actually this topic is quite vast, so what we will do is we will give an overview of soundness and completeness here, and we will give a separate video tutorial on both soundness and completeness. Now to start with an overview of soundness, the derivation of the conclusion, which is psi, from the premises can be given by phi1, phi2 up to phi-n if it reduces to psi. Another definition of the semantic entailment can be given as phi1, phi2 up to phi-n that entails psi. Based on these two cases, we can define the soundness theorem. If phi1, phi2 up to phi-n be proposition or imperative formulas and psi is an imperative formula, then if phi1, phi2 up to phi-n reduces psi, then phi1, phi2 up to phi-n entails phi. This holds. This is a theorem, and the soundness is proved based on the induction on the size of the proof. Here we take one deduction rule as an example. The same will hold good for other deduction rules as well. So we will take an example of PV, DE, PV, where we could see one formula with exclusive disjunction. Say with this exclusive disjunction, if this evaluates to S, which is shown here, and another formula with I plus implied by P theta, this formula evaluates to S, which is shown here. Then the deduced formula also evaluates to S, which is shown here. Now, through similar means, other deduction rules through tables could also be verified. Thus, we can see that when phi1, phi2 up to phi-n reduces psi, then phi1, phi2 up to phi-n entails psi as well. Now talking about the completeness, this is again based on the induction side. The theorem states that when phi1, phi2 and phi-n and psi be imperative formula, if phi1, phi2 up to phi-n entails psi, then phi1, phi2 up to phi-n reduces psi. Here we prove through 6 cases through induction, and it includes both proposition as well as imperative logic. The first case is with I. The second case is with I implied by P. The first one is trivial. The second one, it includes the left portion includes the imperative side, and the right portion towards the arrow includes the proposition side, and we use the deduction rule of conditional introduction. The third one with the conjunction case, Here we use the deduction rule of conjunction introduction. Case 4 is the disjunction. In disjunction we use a particular lemma with I1 plus implied by P. If it occurs with I2 dash, then we can deduce this exclusive OR, and the proof for it is given in the paper that we published in Logica Universalis. Viewers can take a look at it. Case 5 and case 6 are both based on the conditional introduction rules. So using these 6 cases, we prove that when phi1 phi2 up to phi n entails psi, then phi1 phi2 up to phi n deduces psi as well. So that's about the formalism. Now with those formalisms we try to apply that in the computational domain in 4 different varieties. The first one is in artificial intelligence planning. Here the task is to arrive at a sequence given an initial state and a final state. This is an example with a number of blocks that is on a table, which is the initial state. The task is to stack one on the top of the other by the robot in minimum number of steps. So we used the formalism and compared that with the Stanford Research Institute problem solver, which is, and the comparison is provided here. And this column gives the number of blocks. The second column gives the length of optimal plan using strips, and the right column gives the plan using our formalism Mira. So when we have 20 blocks, the length of optimal plan is 19, whereas using Mira it is 10. When the block size increases to 40, the length of optimal plan is 39, whereas our formalism it is 20. The second application that we took was for sequencing the task for special children. They have difficulty in arriving at a sequence, so we thought we could use the formalism to help them. So our what we did was we gave the input as a set of jumbled statements. The formalism using the deduction rule and theorem proving capabilities would reorder itself. So this is an example of preparing a bread sandwich, and if you see on the left side, the tasks are not in sequence, they are jumbled. Like action 1 is spread butter and jam on bread, and action 7 is get butter. So when we feed this type of instructions which are jumbled into the formalism, it reorders and put that in a sequence which is on the right side that reaches towards the goal. The third application that we targeted was the robotics. Here there are 3 basic differences that we would like to talk about. We will take an example here. A robot actually moves from the location hall to porch, and if the robot senses a person, it has to switch on the camera. The locations hall and porch are adjacent to each other, and robot starts in hall with camera in off position. This is a passage, and for this passage a linear temporal logic specification is given here. For the same passage, our formalism specification is given here. Secondly, for the same example, an automaton is generated with these number of states, whereas in the formalism that we use only graphs and there are no states, which decreases the computational complexity. Third difference, suppose we take the action of switching on the camera on seeing a person by the robot. The transition according to the linear temporal logic moves from false to true value. But there is a difficulty with this true or false value. Suppose we say the robot is broken and manually placed in porch. Then the value will still be true. But when we use our formalism, this value will be taken as violated and not true. The fourth application that we took was the instruction type classification. and here we took the different type of instructions according to the formation rules. Here we could see 7, and compared that with Zhang with that number of classification as 5, and this type of classification we can use it for natural language processing. So concluding the work, here we have constructed a logical formalism that is based on the Indian philosophy Mīmāṁsā, where we provide an unambiguous representation of instructions in the computational domain, and this is the formalism here that we provide is unique in several respects, like there is no negation operator, the composite expression of instruction could be given, and there is a direct evaluation of instructions to actions. And we have tested that in multiple domains and have found to be successful. We are exploring more in the computational domain, and the latest one is towards the reinforcement learning that we are exploring. Yeah. These are some of the references that we have used, and thank you.